Welcome to another episode of They've Got Now. I'm really excited to be joined today by Kelly Gramlich to talk about the ACC, which has been, as always, just an insane bloodbath. There's only one undefeated team. 3 weeks into conference play? It feels like even less, if you can have less, really. But Kelly, first and foremost, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. I've followed you on Twitter and followed your work and just love how committed you are to the women's game. So really excited to talk today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Obviously, I've been hearing of your work for a while, just watching TV as one does. Um, yeah, the ACC is nuts, which is why I wanted to get you on. I'm doing a bunch of conference, just kind of mid-season stuff, and I have to start with the ACC because this again, just as always, I think every year this conference finds a way to surprise you, and especially adding in new teams to the mix in Cal and Stanford. I thought even more room for it to be a little funky, and that's exactly what's happened. So I guess before we even get into looking at stuff team by team, what has been maybe overarching thing for the
Mhm.
entire conference that stuck out to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, you're starting ACC because alphabetically makes perfect sense. So I love that
See,
you're
you know what? You should have written the show notes for me.
makes great sense. The ACC, I feel like the ACC overall, the past couple of years has had some really strong years. Like the last maybe 3 years, getting different team every year in the Final Four and just having such depth beyond the top that this year's a little different for me because last year you thought maybe Virginia Tech was the Final Four contender, and then NC State comes out of nowhere and makes the Final Four. Year before you thought it might be Louisville, and then Virginia Tech makes the Final Four. So this year is different in that Notre Dame is the best team, and Notre Dame has the best chance to make the Final Four. Like I think we all get that and we all understand that. And I would be shocked if they don't win the regular season or the ACC tournament because they're that good. And their ceiling, it feels like they haven't even hit their ceiling when it comes to being fully healthy, getting Westbeld back ingrained, getting what they want out of Liza Carlin, and then of course Hidalgo finally coming back after that ankle injury. So I think that's what's different this year compared to recent years is that the ACC has a true alpha, which it really hasn't been that way in previous seasons. Now, beyond that, I still think the ACC has quite a few teams at the top that can push for top four seeds in the NCAA tournament. I know we'll talk about Duke. I think Duke is a very unique team, so talented, and they play such an interesting style defensively. I think that's what happened to Cal the other week. They're just like, whoa,
Yeah.
we've never seen this before. And obviously it didn't go well for them. North Carolina they're playing team ball, right? They're very much doing it by committee. They're really getting after it defensively. I mentioned a team like Cal. I love watching Cal selfishly as a 3-point shooter. I mean, I could just watch Cal all day. And then Georgia Tech is a very interesting team to me. They need to get healthy. They need Danny Carnegie back. But when I saw Georgia Tech play North Carolina in person, did that game, I thought Georgia Tech looked like the second best team in the league and a top 16 team in the country for sure. So they just have to get healthy. But I would say overall, that's kind of what's unique about this year is it feels like there really is kind of a top dog.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's what was so interesting last year because I mean, obviously, again, like you can't talk about Notre Dame without all the injuries they've had the last couple of years. But then you looking at last year, like, okay, cool, what they're like. I remember watching them get absolutely housed by Syracuse,
Yeah.
and then NC State came to Purcell, completely destroyed them,
Yes.
and then no, something just totally clicked for that team, and they were phenomenal. I think even just saying they went to the Sweet 16, I feel like undersells how good of a closing for that year it was for them. And then, like you mentioned, I kind of like looking back around and bouncing around. Like, I just know one of these teams in that like 5 to 10 range in this group is going to wind up higher than they are right now, just based on how this conference tends to go. But let's start with talking about Notre Dame because, like you mentioned, I think obviously this is a team that has Final Four aspirations is playing like a Final Four level team. Some people, I mean, you could argue that they've been the best team in the country over the last month. I wouldn't dispute that necessarily. I still think UCLA is the top dog after watching what they did to Baylor yesterday.
Yeah.
But with this team, I mean, especially like again, looking at how much they've already played through so many different iterations of this group this year, like playing games without Maddie, obviously, for much of the beginning of the year without tons of players in the front court. Liza was not even Liza Carlin just started playing not even a month ago. Like there's been a lot of shift already in this group, and I think that's what's been sort of interesting to watch is how they've still gotten to where they're at handling some of this. Um, so what do you think has stuck out most to you since they had the ill-fated non-conference tournament trip
Yeah.
against TCU and Utah.
Yeah, it's so odd with Notre Dame because Notre Dame, besides UCLA's win over South Carolina, which obviously is the best win in the country,
Yeah,
Notre Dame has probably wins 2, 3, and 4 in
yeah.
terms of best wins in the country. But they by far have the worst losses of those top five teams. And of course, some of those top five teams have losses to Notre Dame, which is a good loss. So it's weird. They went to that tournament. They lost to TCU, who's a good team, right?
Hmm.
But Notre Dame should beat TCU, and they lose to Utah, who just recently fell out of the top 25. I don't know what happened down there. I'm not quite sure. They weren't fully healthy yet. They weren't really playing Westbeld or Carlin. But the good news is they've been able to right the ship. And if you needed to work through some things down there to get to where you are now, then it's worth it. And in the end, those aren't terrible losses. I mean, you're still on the one line. If you're Notre Dame, you're probably going to get a number one seed. I think it's taken a little while, even though on paper it maybe looked seamless, but I think it took a little while, maybe working through that tournament for Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo to kind of figure each other out. Obviously, Southern Cal, they were electric in that game. UConn, they were so good together, and Texas too. So they figured it out and put it together against really good teams. And it's about what I thought it would look like, right? I thought that Olivia Miles would be more on ball, Hannah Hidalgo a bit more off ball because she's more of a pure scorer, even though they play so fast that it's really just whoever gets the ball and go, which is
Hmm.
so hard to stop. I think what's really blown me away about Notre Dame, Mark, is Olivia Miles is shooting 20, I think it's 23% better from the 3-point line than she did 2 years ago in her last healthy season. Hannah Hidalgo is shooting over 10 percentage points better from the 3-point line than she did last year. That makes them unguardable. The only knock really on Hannah Hidalgo last year was, oh, you could probably give her the three. Like she was making 33%. Like you could give her the three. The knock on Olivia Miles was she didn't really take threes. You weren't really worried about it. But now, when you pair that with Sonia Citron, who's one of the most underrated players in the entire country, and then you pair that with some of the other guards they'll bring in that can shoot, and now you have Maddie Westbeld truly back in the fold. I thought the game against Georgia Tech, we were there for ACC Network. Westbeld looked like she did last year. The ACC tournament was the true turning point for Notre Dame. They ran through that tournament with basically 6 players because they had Kylie Watson get injured.
Hmm.
And Westbeld played so well. I mean, she was hitting the mid range, getting to the rim, just so good defensively. And it took her a couple games, but she looked like that against Georgia Tech. And then Leah King, I'm not sure there is a transfer playing better in the country than her. And I've covered Leah King a lot when she was at Pittsburgh. She was obviously a great player. She took a huge jump. I think you have to give Tori Verdi a lot of credit there. I mean, from I think it was, I guess, her junior to senior year before the COVID year, she went from averaging like 9 points per game to 20 and was the ACC most improved player. But she fits Notre Dame perfectly. She doesn't need stuff run for her. She doesn't even really need a lot of touches, but she'll impact the game, offensive rebounding, running the floor. She's just the perfect fit for them. My question is just how will they continue to bring Liza Carlin in? She was playing the five. She's got great size. Can she get more comfortable? She just looks a little uncomfortable. And then they have Kate Koval, who played a lot early in the season. I imagine if and when they match up with UCLA, they're going to need her a good bit to go up against Lauren Betts. But beyond that, you look at the bigs they're going to play. It feels like Westbeld and King can handle most of those bigs. So I'm not sure we've even seen the final form, but if they come to play, there's no like if they come to play every night, they're not going to lose in the ACC. I don't see that happening. I think they're going to be our first undefeated team in ACC regular season play in a while, probably since Notre Dame 5 or 6 years ago with Coach McGraw. So I just think they're that good. I think if they come to play every night, no one can beat them in this league, and there are only a handful of teams that can beat them in the country, and they've already beaten Southern Cal, Texas, and UConn. We'll see if they play South Carolina, if they play UCLA, but I think this is a team that legitimately should have the goal of winning the national championship.
Yeah, no, I'm in lockstep with you on that, and I think kind of like you said, it was really fun to watch. You know, Hannah and Olivia seemed to like not click right away is maybe the wrong way to put it. It felt like there was just like something early, like this team kind of had it, and then um, even before getting to that point, playing Utah and TCU, there was already some like it felt like a little bit like okay, how do we kind of work out some of the kinks of this? Like especially as people got tape on Kate, I think to me that was the biggest thing in the tournament was okay, we really struggled to keep somebody at the 5 spot, and without Kate being comfortable there, they just didn't really have an answer. It was two, and that was kind of it. And now having obviously Maddie and Liza back, and Kate getting just some more seasoning under her, being able to slot back in a little bit more naturally. And I'd add too, like I think I mean, Sony obviously does incredibly good things, but she goes from being like last year she was like the number 2 player
Mhm.
behind Hannah, having to take on more as an on-ball player, to now it's like, and credit to her. I mean, she's been able to handle the shift really well. But I think you saw that first, through Utah and TCU too, kind of struggling a little bit with like, okay, how do I find my role within this?
Yeah.
What does
Yeah.
that look like? But now, like you mentioned, I think the Georgia Tech game was such a good analog. So I was excited for that one because I mean they both run Princeton, both run a ton of similar actions, and you saw like just especially once that fourth quarter hit of them just kind of really being able to lock in and shut down, but also just run their stuff like they need to, and really take that game over and win it comfortably. Um, but the big thing too, like you mentioned with Olivia, I think what's really been fun to watch for me this year is obviously the shooting, but I think what goes along with everything. Like I probably went out to South Bend 4 or 5 times last year, and every time I was there, I saw her working out with Carlos Knox one on one when she couldn't do anything on court outside of shooting. And you see it so much this year, but I think it's that in turn with the footwork, like her footwork, her control, her balance, everything. Like I think there were times where like you never had a question whether or not she could get to the rim, but now it's like okay, she's setting everything up and manipulating, and it's like starting to weaponize her vision alongside everything else. And to me, that's what makes the offense so deadly. Like you have that, but she knows where everyone needs to be, where they're going to be, where they excel, and like you just kind of see her really fully coming into being a point guard and somebody who can lead an offense. And to me, like that's just what's been so amazing with this because that's real growth and like you can tell everything she put in to get to this point. So that's been
Yeah.
really fun to watch, and especially with Maddie back. I mean, like in that Georgia Tech game, I think one of the not even like knocks, but one of the things that I think Georgia Tech had picked on in that game and will moving forward is like what happens if teams can run inverted offense a little bit. And like literally I think second play of that game they go to Maddie pick and roll in a 4-5, and it's like that's where it's so hard to guard that. Like I think it seems simplistic for most people, but I'm like okay, most people don't have a player who's 6'2" that can score at 3 levels and pass. Like it's hard to guard that stuff. So there's just so much here that's really exciting, especially moving forward. And hey, that they did that without Hannah even playing. And speaking of Hannah, I mean, obviously, I think you could make it what like a 4 or 5 player case right now, but Hannah probably has just about the best case for National Player of the Year, which is pretty awesome to say. I mean, what has maybe stood out most to you this year for her compared to last season, and kind of taking that elevated step?
Yeah. I mean, Hannah Hidalgo, it's funny how we've been talking about Notre Dame and we just really started about talking about Hannah because
Yeah.
we're almost just conditioned to what she does. It's like, oh, she had another 25, 5-5 night or whatever it is. And you just kind of move on like, oh, yeah, that's what Hannah Hidalgo does. But I think, you mentioned with Olivia Miles, I feel like we're seeing the final form of Olivia Miles. And I think we're seeing the benefit of her sitting out a year and really learning the game and learning where she, like you said, where she needs to get the ball and just the pace and control. I think you're seeing a little better control from Hidalgo. A few times last year, look, she plays at 100 miles an hour. Like that is her, and that is what makes her so deadly. Is she can get 3 steals in a minute and make your point guard just demoralized, and you've got to sit her for a couple of minutes because Hannah Hidalgo just picked her pocket 3 times in a row. So she plays so fast and with such, almost recklessness that it's good. But I think you're seeing a little more this year is she's able to focus it more and not have to, and perhaps because she has more help, right? Not have to go as hard and avoid some of those crazy turnovers that would sometimes happen. A little bit in the ACC tournament, Westbelt and Citron played so well last year that Hidalgo didn't shoot it as well. And it was okay. Like Notre Dame was able to find their way. As I mentioned earlier, Hidalgo shooting near 44, 45% from 3 now compared to 10 percentage points lower last year is a huge difference maker for her and for Notre Dame because they can play her a little more at the 2. She can be that lethal threat. Then you have Citron who shoots 44% and you good luck. Like you're done. So I think you're seeing a little more control from her, knowing like when she needs to get up in someone and knowing when she can relax a little bit because there's just not as much being asked of her, which is hilarious because she's averaging more points per game. So I think it's working out well for Hannah Hidalgo because she doesn't have to do every single thing, that she's able to score a bit more. But she is one of the most tenacious defenders I've ever seen. I think she is one of the most tenacious defenders we've ever seen in women's college basketball. the way she can change a game so quickly with a steal, or the way she can really bother the other team's point guard while also scoring 25. That's what makes her the national player of the year in my opinion. People say, well, she plays both sides. And I feel like, yes, that's the argument, but I think you have to really emphasize what that means. She doesn't just guard the other team's best player, like she is the most disruptive defensive player on the floor every single night. She's giving you the most value defensively while scoring 25. Like I can't, the only comparison is maybe someone like a Brittany Griner because of the impact she would have from a shot blocking perspective and her size and her presence that would alter everything the other offense did, right? That's basically what Hannah's doing at 5'6". It's, I can't think of, and maybe I'm missing someone, Mark, let me know. I cannot really think of a comp for her in
No,
college
I
basketball
don't. I can't. I mean, it's
with those
interesting.
numbers when you're averaging 25. Like that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, because like I went back last year, because Neil Ivy talks a ton about some of the personality comparisons between her and Skylar Diggins Smith, and
Yeah, yeah,
going back and like Skylar was incredible at Notre Dame, but like Hannah, especially like because I went back and watched a bunch of. I was too young to like really like fully understand what Skylar was doing at that time, but like going back and watching him, like yeah, man, like Hannah just has a different level that, and not saying she's better than Skylar, but it's just like it's interesting. I think so often you can watch and look at stats and you can find stuff that's inflated in it. But to me, it was last year watching them against Illinois. I mean, that's like Makira Cook, Genesis Bryant, two of the most experienced guards in basketball, and she just gave them like the
yeah,
worst game ever.
yeah,
Like you could just tell there's just a level like it's interesting because I've heard people say like, "Oh, her footwork's so good," this and that. Like it's not that her footwork's bad, but I think it's like she is just so capable of doing things that other people can't do. It reminds me of
yeah,
like not to make it. I don't know if you know boxing at all, but like Roy Jones was like my favorite fighter of all time. Just to explain to people, he was like the best fighter of all time because he thought the game was really smart, but also like he just did stuff nobody else could do. Like he could
sure.
throw angles that nobody else could do because you other people couldn't do them. Like they couldn't even
Mhm.
contemplate it. And that's how I feel about Hannah. Like she's able to literally like overshoot a gap, overplay it, make you go the other way, and
Yeah,
beat you to that spot. And like
and recover
that's
and get
that.
a steal.
It's
Yeah,
can you call it good footwork? Sure, but to me, that's just being. I mean, that's just being special. Like there's
yeah,
like not stuff you can do about that. And on top of that, like with the national player of the year aspect, I think so much of it to me with awards is consistency and like
mm,
you look up and down. Number one, she really has only had quote unquote one bad shooting game this year, and that was UConn and Utah. I guess two, UConn, Utah, um, technically UNC, but I thought she still played really well in that game. But she's had every single game out of 16 she's played. She's had two where she scored less than 23 points. It's like the
that's
consistency to do that every game, like so much this year, like um, all the time last year was okay, you have to bring the ball up and start plays. And now like that she's really gotten comfortable in doing so much of what they want to do, playing off of Olivia and being able to come off the ball. Like again, you just get her quickness going in a different kind of way that's even harder to guard in some aspects. Um, yeah, it's been pretty incredible to watch. And like you said, I think it's so easy to kind of take for granted how incredible it's been because at this point she's like, well, she does it every game, and I'm like, yeah, dude, that's why it's crazy.
yeah. She's. I guess the best way to describe this is she's putting up numbers that we haven't seen, but in specific ways that maybe your average fan wouldn't notice. So the steals obviously are insane, right?
Mhm.
And that is pure production. Like you can talk about, oh, this player is a great defender and they're so technically sound and all this stuff. And that's great. I'm sure WNBA GMs want that. I get it. But you can't argue with her defensive production and the points that it literally leads to for her team. The other thing that stands out to me, this is a 5'6", and 5'6" probably on a good day, Hannah Hidalgo, who is shooting 50% from the field. Like those are numbers that we attribute to a 6'6", 6'7" player who can shoot 50% from the field when you're the smallest player on the court. That is really mind blowing to me. And yeah, I just don't feel like we've seen Skylar Diggins is a good comp because, and I've heard Neil talk about this, and Muffet too. I've talked with Coach often. The competitiveness is different. That's something Neil Ivy told us from the jump
Mhm.
that she walked on campus and she just took over. And her spirit and her competitiveness, like it changed practice, it changed everything for Notre Dame. And that's what Muffet McGraw has told me about Skylar Diggins. she has said many times that Skylar Diggins changed everything at Notre Dame, just the second she walked on campus with her competitiveness. So that's what Hannah Hidalgo's done. And then you pair her with, first of all, pairing that with her offensive ability, which is very unique, and that she's shooting 45% from three. And then, of course, with the talent around them. I mean, this Notre Dame team, I think they even look better than I thought, because I thought there'd be a little more growing pains for Olivia and Hannah to figure it out. But the thing that most people don't realize too is that Olivia Miles was practicing with Notre Dame since February of last year.
Mm-hmm.
And she could have come back. And I give Notre Dame staff a ton of credit for not pressuring her, because this is a team that was down to 6 players going into March Madness who probably could have made a run if Olivia Miles had said, okay, I'm going to put on the jersey. But she wasn't ready, and Notre Dame knew that. And now they're getting, the benefit of that.
No, absolutely. Well, let's transition from Notre Dame. We could talk about them all day, but there's so much else that we can get into. Let's talk about Duke next, because Duke's technically second in the ACC, 6-1, tied with NC State. I liked what you mentioned off top, talking about saying, this Duke team is talented, but they're a little bit different in what they do. Just to run some numbers really quick, because I was curious about this the other day. Going off of, obviously, their one loss in ACC play is to UNC, who we'll talk about as well. They have not played, those two teams combined have not played a double-digit separation game in the last 3 years.
Wow.
And it feels like even more insane than that. So you go to the 2023, 56-61 UNC wins in the first game, 41-45 UNC wins in the second game, and then Duke wins in the tournament 44-40. And then the highest scoring game that they've had combined was 68-60 the following year, but that was an overtime. Like, these teams get after it defensively. They're gritty. It's not always like it's very much like early thousands NBA basketball when they meet, but it's just ferocious stuff. So let's talk, with Duke. Where are you at with this team? Because I think in some ways you look at their record right now at 15-4. And when you consider their strength of schedule, they currently are second in the country. Kara absolutely just went all out, as she does every single year with the schedule. So this team definitely took its lumps early, but I think has continued to round into form. So where are you at with this group right now? About halfway through play.
First of all, you bring up that Duke UNC 44-40 game. That was at the ACC tournament.
That was nasty. That was
put that game on E2,
games I've ever
and we were all watching it. And we were like, "Oh my god, why did they pick this game?"
Yeah,
that was brutal. I remember it vividly. So, okay, with Duke, and I've had Duke quite a few times this year, and honestly, every time I've had Duke, they've looked a little different. And it's interesting because they played such a tough non-conference, and Kara takes a lot of pride in that. She wanted to challenge this team. And it felt like in the non-con, they had really figured out some offensive issues. I mean, I know the Oklahoma game went to overtime, but in regulation, it was like high 90s. So they were just scoring with Oklahoma. And I'm like, wow, what is this Duke team? But I think some of that was they were playing a little bit. Their style was kind of mimicking some of their opponents in that way. Like, okay, no, against Oklahoma, we have to score, whatever. But Kara definitely wasn't pleased with the defense at that point. And now the defense has really rounded into form, and you're kind of wondering where the offense is. So the whole question with Duke is, it feels like they figured it out defensively. What they did to Cal was nasty work.
Yeah.
I mean, they made a team who is trying to push for a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament look like they didn't even know how to pass the ball. Like, what Duke did defensively to Cal was just really, really impressive. But Duke has struggled a bit offensively in the last month or so. They had the Virginia game. I did that game. That was ugly. Virginia probably should have won. Duke just gritted it out at the end. But Duke really couldn't find much offensively. The North Carolina game, I mean, gosh, everyone struggled, it felt like. So for Duke to reach their potential, I think they have to be better offensively. I think a lot of it comes down to a player like Reagan Richardson. Ashlyn Jackson's actually been very consistent. I think Reagan would tell you she's got to make some more shots, and she's getting good looks. It's just a matter of knocking them down. For Duke to be where they want to be, Reagan has to play like NCAA tournament Reagan from last year, where she was just phenomenal. And then the whole question is like, how much of it? I always feel like Toby Fournier needs a little more time on the floor. And look, maybe Kara has a mastermind plan, and I'm sure she does, to kind of ease Toby a little more into the year. And then March, when you're past that freshman wall, whatever it is, maybe we'll see some more Toby Fournier and see her playing like 30 minutes because she's special. She is a special talent. And in pretty much every Duke game I've done, there has not been a player on the other team that can guard Toby Fournier. Like her length, her footwork, her moves, and even her post moves are already ready. Like she's ready to go. So I'm sure some of it's defensive or whatever, but I just want to see more and more Toby Fournier, and I'm hopeful we'll see more February into March. But they're so much more offensively talented than they were a couple years ago when they were the best defensive team in the country. But it feels like they flipped a switch where they're saying, okay, we want to be that again. We want to be the best defensive team in the country. The way that, and I'm doing a tape on this on ACC Network this week, so I'm excited about it. They just do such unique things. Like I have this tape I'm doing for Duke. They're trapping off an offensive rebound. Okay, most people when you're guarding kind of like just the DHO action at the top of the key, you're just going to switch it. You're kind of going to lay back and just play on the arc and see what's going to happen. Reagan Richardson is literally going up over the DHO and like going over the screen, but going over the DHO to get a steal. Very few other teams do that. And so I think especially for a team like Cal, when you haven't seen it before, you're just so taken aback. And that's why I think Duke can be very effective in the NCAA tournament because a lot of teams haven't seen another team that just guards and defends like they do. And the thing with Duke, too, is they have so much depth. To have the luxury of bringing Fournier off the bench, but also Alucia Kanawa. If there's one other defender in the ACC that is somewhat of the same breed as Hannah Hidalgo, it's Alucia Kanawa.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is someone too who just plays 1 billion miles an hour, and they bring her off the bench and they just say go as hard as you can, and she does, and she's getting better offensively too. But I think Duke has a very high ceiling. I think it just comes down to can they do enough offensively, and in those big games when they're playing another team that can match their athleticism and match their ability to get up and down the floor because they're great offensively in the open floor like most people are, but it's more executing and making shots in the half court. So I'm just curious to see if Duke can almost pair some of the offense from the non-con with this defensive identity that they very much started embracing. And I mean, maybe it's a non-answer, but that's just kind of I think we're going to have to see them play some of these better teams, play NC State, play UNC again, play Notre Dame to see really where they are.
Yeah, I like everything you mentioned. I think with Duke, my biggest thing I come back to, because exactly like you said, I think the talent is so there. And even in every loss, I think you look at every loss and you can kind of pinpoint it to one thing. Like watching back the South Carolina game, it's just the first quarter. Like if you remove the first quarter,
Yeah.
which you can say that about
100%.
a lot of things, but you remove the first quarter from that game and it's like, cool. Well, that was right on par. They looked like they could hang with that South Carolina team. But I think, like you said, with the consistency piece was kind of like the opposite a little bit of Hannah. Like I talked about it with Reagan earlier this year. I think the biggest thing for her is being that consistent player because you talk about that tournament and so much of that tournament of why they succeeded was against K-State and Oklahoma. They just saw drop coverage every single ball screen and absolutely obliterated it. And
it was a little, I mean, this respect, it was a little kind of like Big 12 defense.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
okay.
no, for sure. And but it's also like the aspect of like just taking what's given. And I think sometimes this team struggles with that. I think it was I don't want to saying issue is a little too far, but I think last year it was part of the thing. It's like, okay, well, can you just take this and take what's given to you, see and read those things? And I feel like this team's just kind of inconsistent with how they read the court at times. And that sometimes that's just, I mean, it tends to just be with the guards. I think Ashland's been pretty good with that this year, but overall, like, I think that's just where I'm at with this group. And I think it's tough too, because like this team deserves a lot of credit for being where they're at. So I think a lot of people can look at where they're at, you see all the top 100 recruits and this and that, but I'm like losing every player, coach, anyone I've talked to last year who had to play against Camilla Emspo and Kennedy Brown. Like, I mean, that was the most difficult front court to play against that didn't have, an All-American. I mean, the two players 6'6" that are smart, that are mobile, like the change from that to this post group, I think that's been a really big turning point for them and kind of figuring that out. And I think they're still weighing it. Like Jordan Woods brought some stuff as a stretch player. Delaney Thomas just kind of does a little bit of everything. Like you mentioned, I think Toby to me has to be the answer eventually.
Yeah.
Like how they get to that will be interesting to see. But like, I mean, she's their leading scorer right now, playing 18 minutes per game off the bench,
Crazy.
which is
Crazy.
hilarious. But like, I think so much is just like the game continuing to slow down for her and getting
Yeah.
comfortable with it. But I also feel like, kind of like you mentioned, like, is there just a point where it's like, all right, we let her just play 25 minutes a game and figure it
I
out
mean,
because you kind of
as a
need it.
fan, I am hoping so.
Yeah.
And maybe they get to that. Maybe they have this plan. I mean, Kara is so, she's got a system for everything. She's so locked into these things. So maybe that is a plan. Like we're going to kind of ease her in. And then by the time we really have to make a push, ACC tournament, whatever it is, maybe it's that. And I also know for them from like replacing those posts, which I know they loved Brown and Emsbo. I think Ariana Roberson was
Yeah.
going to do a lot for them. So that was a tough injury for them to have to navigate to.
No, absolutely. Well, yeah, we're gonna find out a lot more about them soon because they play Georgia Tech, I think Sunday.
Yep.
So that's gonna be a big game for them. Big game for Georgia Tech as well. Let's talk about UNC now, though, who took down Duke in another one of those absolute grind fests recently. This UNC team, I wasn't sure how I felt early on in the year, knowing that they were going to make some of these big changes. Obviously, they had the game against UConn, and it wasn't pretty early on in the game. But I think you look overall at this team. I've been really impressed with where they've gotten to, and I think obviously want to still see some things continue to iron out, but overall, like I just feel a lot better about where this team is at and what they can do ceiling wise compared to last year or the year prior. When you look at again like overall depth, but also just, I mean, this is probably the best defense in the
Yes.
ACC in my opinion, one of the best in the country. Um, but I think to me, the starting point is how good Maria Gokdang has been. Because like I've always liked Maria Gokdang. I loved watching her at BC. I thought she was really good at BC. One kind of underrated. Thought she was a really sneaky good pickup last year. Immediately slotted in as a good starter. I think she's been incredible this year. Like
Mhm.
she's just been unreal from the field. Has cut down her fouling a little bit. Uh, Continues to be an absolute staple. Like big reason they took out Kentucky, their best win of the season, in my opinion, is because she was the best big on the court against a really good Kentucky team. Um, and to me, like again, I think her numbers can go underrated because of again, this team routinely plays 11 players, so
Mhm.
you don't really have anybody touching 30 minutes per game other than Alyssa Usby. But like, yeah, well, I mean, where have you been at with this team so far?
Yeah, pleasantly surprised, I think is where I would go with UNC. We just saw they were so Deja Kelly heavy for 4 years. It's like, okay, what is it going to look like? And it's a much more, like you said, 11 players, everybody's contributing. And it feels like pretty much every player from last year has gotten better in
Mm,
some way, shape, or form. I mean, Maria Gokdang has been great. She is kind of what I thought she would be last year for them. And maybe just took a little more time because she was still a really young player. She had that breakout freshman year at BC and just figuring out her role, getting the ball a little bit more. She's been phenomenal. I think she's become one of the best bigs in the ACC. When you talk about just overall, it's probably her. Michaela Timpson is obviously up there, but she's definitely in that mix. We're talking like first team all ACC type of player. And then you have Alyssa Usby, who is just consistent. I mean, you know what she's going to bring: the toughness, the grit, the rebounding. The game that I called in person with UNC Georgia Tech, that was probably one of UNC's worst games versus a really good team this year. And Zoe Smith from Georgia Tech really shut down Usby. So that was surprising to me because it's weird to see Usby get shut down. So obviously that's something that can't happen. That's what can be an issue for them. If Usby can't score, then it's an issue. But it seems like they're hopefully going to learn from that situation. What I like about UNC too is they've got a lot of depth at the guard position, and it's a lot of young, exciting talent. I mean, you have Donarski, who's the OG and the vet,
mm.
but Renaya Kelly has looked really good for this team. You've had some spot minutes from Townsend and Laney Grant, who I know they're excited about. Like you've got a young core there at guard. India Navarre is a player I've always liked.
I love her game so much.
Yes, I was so impressed with her last year and just seeing her have a bigger role. She's a really fun player to watch. So I think this team just has a lot of depth. Funny enough, I mean, I feel like there's a good bit of parallels between Duke and North Carolina.
Yeah.
And in recent years, they've been a little more different, even though they always play these grinded out, please make it stop games. But, UNC, like you said, arguably the best defense in the ACC. Duke's right there trying to push for that. They have a lot of depth. They're led by, like we said, some of those kind of veterans who are getting bigger roles, like a Gokdang or Reagan Richardson or whatever. So see a lot of similarities. Obviously, UNC beat Duke already, so you got to give them that nod. But I had questions. I mean, I didn't know what it would look like without Deja Kelly, and it feels like they're better than I thought, for sure. I think UNC is better than I thought. That Kentucky win was massive for their resume. They're about to play some really good teams, so we're going to learn a little bit more. But they're up to what, 13 in the country, something like that. I've been impressed with the job that Courtney Banghart has done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you mentioned too, Wake Forest, who has been tough defensively, they were able to like really just slow down games. So it's always a fun one to see with that. Florida State on Sunday and then Cal next week. So a lot coming up down the pipeline for them.
Mm-hmm.
Last thing I would say though, like you mentioned, Indian Navarre, again, I
Yeah.
think this team box scores can be so deceiving just because you look at her box and like, oh, like 9 points, 3 rebounds, like 3 assists, that's whatever. And like, but you watch her play, and I think she has a real case as like an all defense member this year with what she
Yeah.
brings.
Yeah.
And then also just always comes up big with some kind of shot or drive. Obviously want to see the efficiency continue to pop up, but I think like that's part of the growth process as a guard. And we didn't even mention like I think Blanca Thomas deserves a lot of credit for winning
Yes,
that game
thank
against
you.
Duke. Oh my
Oh
God, she
my
walled
gosh.
off the rim
Her
completely.
against
That was
Toby
like,
Fournier. That was definitely the game where Toby Fournier struggled the most. And there's no coincidence that UNC won the game because of it. And Blanca Thomas, pretty much I just went back after that game and watched every Fournier play just to figure out like what the heck happened. And Blanca Thomas was involved in basically every single miss. So
yep.
yeah, give her a lot of credit.
Yeah, she was incredible. I think that was the most minutes she played this season. Yeah, 24 minutes, 3 blocks that game, 7 points, 8 boards. She's somebody I'm excited to keep watching.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's go and bounce around just a couple more teams real quick. Mentioning Florida State, I
Yeah.
want to talk about Florida State because Tanaya Latson has been, I mean, she continues to get better, I mean, hands down, probably the best scorer in the country. She's leads the country in scoring. But legitimately, like, has become. I think she was a player where at times you could say she was close to a 3 level score, but wasn't quite there because the three ball wasn't there. Do you know what she's shooting on off the dribble threes this year?
Off
Percentage?
the dribble threes. I know
Yeah,
her 3-point percentage is up in the 40s now, which is
yeah.
incredible.
She's shooting 41.7% on off the dribble threes, which is like, I think it's close to 2/3 of all of her 3 point attempts are off the dribble right now, which, like, to me, that's what's been wild. Because her freshman year, I think she shot 39 or 40% from three her freshman year, but it's pretty low volume. It was mostly like off the
Mhm.
catch stuff. And now it's gotten to the point where it's like, you have to guard her everywhere all the time, which you did in general already because she's so bursty. But now it's just like, I don't entirely know how you stop her. And she's gotten so like I think kind of what went under the radar last year is how much better she got as a passer. Like just
Mhm.
she really started to excel, reading when she draws help, making the right play. Her and Timpson are just unreal. Obviously, Mario Gordon as well. But where are you at with this team as a whole? Because I think as much as they have improved in some ways, I think the defense is a little bit better this year. Obviously, Tanaya and KK are just incredible. It still feels like this team is just missing a little bit of something to take the step to, and I don't mean to be unfair to them, but like knowing like this is a team that wants to make the second weekend of the tournament. They don't just want to go to the tournament and lose a game. How do they get there? So how do you kind of evaluate where this group is at right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for Florida State, obviously, when Brooke Wyckoff took over, they changed the style and they're playing so fast, run and gun. I mean, just playing as fast as possible. They want to score 90 on you, that kind of thing. And I think there are some limits to that because in the end, you play a team like Cal, who's just, by the way, you traveled 3,000 miles, um, who's just lighting it up and just torches you in the first quarter. And it feels like from a defensive standpoint, there's nothing you can do. And so you can't really get back in the game. So
Mhm.
there's situations like that where it can be a little tricky for Florida State. But I still think, like you said, getting to a second weekend, getting to a Sweet 16 with this scheme, you should be able to do that. And with a player like Tanai Latson, who I think is the best scorer in the country, to your point. One thing that I always wonder about with Florida State, and I know that what's crazy about Latson too is she is really efficient. So it's not like she's just dribbling the air out of the ball. I mean, she
Mhm.
is an efficient player. And I love the emergence of Amaria Gordon. I think that's what really helped Latson become a better passer last year is because Gordon was available and there and healthy. And you have kind of like a Robin with her Batman from a guard position. I've always wanted to see Timpson featured more. And I mean, you talk to Coach McGraw, that's all she ever says because she loves post players. Michaela Timpson. I mean, and Michaela Timpson is so talented. And some of it is they're playing so fast that they're not running a lot of half court stuff where they're getting the ball to Timpson. And if she gets the ball, she scores. And the way that she can attack the glass is really impressive. But Florida State is just so one way that sometimes, almost wish they'd play a little more half court and get the ball to Michaela Timpson. But I think the big thing for them is just they've got to, when they're not scoring or things aren't falling or they're not getting out in transition, can they win a different way? And that's something where in the Cal game, you didn't really see that. Stanford game, tried to slow it down more. Can they win a game where teams really try to slow them down? I mean, that's the question. We'll see. Again, as we've talked about, everyone's got more challenges coming up. But I really think for this team, that's the goal. Because Florida State has been in Sweet 16s and Elite Eights. I mean, under Sue Semrau, they've done that. They haven't been there in a while, and that would be a huge next step for them. But they've got to – and then the other part, too, with Florida State last year, they had such a quick start. They had such a good start, and then they really fell off February, March with this style. Can they maintain that? Like, can we see them really making some noise in March? I'm very curious.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the bigger things I'll be looking for is like Sydney Bowles had a really good non-conference.
Mm-hmm.
I've been impressed. I thought she would be a rotation player for them. I didn't see her being quite this level for them after watching her at A&M last year. So I've been impressed with that. I've liked that, but I want to see her again continue to bounce back from closer to where she was in non-con. I like some of what Malia Williams has brought. I think it's just kind of like who do they find as like the consistent
Yeah.
fifth player in lineups? Like the four players that want to get out there for the most part with Villegas along with the top three, but who is going to be kind of that fifth player? So I think to me, like when you look at some of those games where they have struggled early on, because that was an issue at times last year. If they had a slow
Mm-hmm.
start, they really
Yes.
struggled to come back because, like you mentioned, I think if you can get a lead and start off like that and keep your pace going, it's hard to counter. But then when you look at the Illinois game early on this year that they
Mm-hmm.
lost. I think so much of it is, okay, how do we kind of come back from this? So again, finding that fifth starter is going to be really interesting to see where they kind of land on that by the end of the season. Um, Interestingly enough, just looking at the ACC overall, when we first started talking, we were like, what are we going to say about Louisville? And lo and behold, Louisville is 6-2 in the
Yeah.
ACC now. Obviously, just took a tough loss recently, but I think you look up and down at what this team's been able to do and kind of come back to. I think this is a little bit in line with what I expected this year. Obviously, not that you expect the team to maybe quote unquote struggle as much as they did, but they played an incredibly difficult non-conference
Yeah.
off rip, and also looking back, it's still as difficult as it looked then. And this was just a very different team. So much. I mean, what, 7 freshmen on this team?
Mm-hmm.
All of them are playing for the most part. Um, where are you at with Louisville right now?
Yeah, I just had Louisville, Virginia Tech, and that was a great game. I think Virginia Tech, they looked great. If Lonnie White can continue to emerge, that's a team that I think can be in the tournament, which would be a heck of a job for Megan Duffy in year one.
Yeah.
But for Louisville, it's weird. They're such a by committee team that they don't have what they've had in the past, an HVL, a Dana Evans, obviously go back to Asia Durr and Shoni Schimmel, whatever, but Angel McCautry. Like they don't have a real go-to player. And it's been this way for a couple of years for Louisville. So they really have to get it done by committee, and different players show up at different times. And if they don't shoot it well, like Jada Curry had a rough night against Virginia Tech. If she makes one or two more of those threes, they probably win. I mean, their margin for error is just smaller now. And they've got to make shots because they're not as disruptive as they have been on defense. They don't have Emily Engstler at the top of the press. Like they don't have an athlete like that. And what Jeff Walls was telling me too is he feels like the urgency on defense has been better. Like this team is getting that, hey, to win, we have to guard. And so you saw that in their 7-game winning streak, and it just was snapped by Virginia Tech. So I think you're seeing more urgency from them. I think Jada Curry is still the key piece. I think she's got to be more consistent. She's the most talented offensive player on the roster, and she needs to give them 15 consistently, but shoot it well. And that's kind of she's a big game changer for me. And then Taj Roberts, she had a tough one against Virginia Tech, but she's so talented. She is I think she's going to be a star at Louisville. She can
Yeah.
be kind of that next alpha for them. next year or the year after, but she still just kind of has some freshman moments. And I thought for them, like playing, even though they played a really tough non-con, I thought the environment in Castle maybe got to some of their young players a little bit for Louisville. And their bigs are just, they're solid and consistent. But again, the player that can really be a game changer offensively is Curry. And so you have to see her be a little more consistent. And I thought Jalea Williams, like I was thinking this doing that game, Jalea Williams came out of nowhere in the fourth quarter and she was attacking the rim and she was so effective. And in my mind, I'm just like, where has this been? Like this, we needed this in the first or second quarter for Louisville. So I think it's still a little bit of work in progress, but I mean, as per usual, Jeff Walz is getting the most out of that roster. And who knows, we could blink and they could end up being a 7 seed, 6 seed, whatever it is. And I promise you, whoever draws them as a 6 seed is going to be mad that they have to play Louisville for sure.
No, absolutely. I think just to kind of piggyback on that, like you mentioned with Taj, I think that's the player in the ACC, like freshman wise, I'm probably most excited about. What she can do, like, I mean, I watched her a bunch in AAU. I loved her game. Like, just felt like a Louisville player. Like the player can really slash, create, obviously gets down and defends too. But I think your point about Jade is a really good point. Because to me, just this team just doesn't have like a player to kind of balance things out. I think things would look a lot easier for some of their secondary players if they had somebody who could kind of consistently draw attention and be that top player. And I would love to see Jay to become that. We got to talk about NC State because we didn't even mention them really somehow. I think to me, this is the team that obviously there are plenty of teams in the country that can quote unquote go under the radar. But to me, NC State is a team that has been like just really interesting because again, anytime a team loses early on, I think they just kind of get shoved under the rug a little bit. Obviously, had a lot to kind of figure out. I think this team, obviously, again, you bring back that top four of Isaiah, Sanaya, Zoe, and Madison Hayes, and everybody's like, oh, well, they should be in the Final Four again. And I think obviously that's a goal for them, but replacing their entire front court just throws a big wrench in that. But obviously, the recent loss to Cal notwithstanding, and that's a tough game for them. So, but this team really seems to be starting to kind of click and figure some things out. Particularly, I mean, looking at Virginia, I think I can't sing the praises of Madison Hayes enough for what she does for this team in all facets. Because this team, they know how to win games ugly, which I think is a credit to them. Yeah. It also can be, I'm sure that Westmore doesn't love having to win ugly, but they can do it. So yeah, where are you at with this team right now?
I think NC State, their guard play is tremendous. Their guard play is probably the second best, maybe third best if you want to throw a healthy Georgia Tech in there, in the ACC with Isaiah and Sanaya, Zoe. And they just are just bringing Zam Jones back. She was hurt for a while, and now she's been back, and kind of they're easing her back in. So that's really exciting. And then Madison Hayes, who encounters a guard, kind of a hybrid player there. But you're right. Mimi Collins and River Baldwin meant so much to this team. Probably people remember River a little more than Mimi Collins. Mimi Collins was a just do it all, defensively rebound, glue player for them. And they're missing that presence, that's for sure. But they still are so talented at the guard spot that Isaiah can just walk in and give you 30 on a given night, and you're probably not going to win the game because Isaiah gave you 30. So they still have that for him. I like Trieger. Trieger's coming along.
I've been really excited about her.
Westmore likes her a lot. So, I mean, he's been kind of just circling through bigs. He's got a lot of options. They're just young and inexperienced. So he's got bodies to work with. So I think as Trieger and these other young bigs start to come along, that NC State still hasn't played their best yet, which is good. I mean, you don't want to have played your best in mid-January. The thing that worries me for NC State, and I feel like this happens more often than not, especially in the ugly wins, Sanaya Rivers gets 2 fouls. I mean, I feel like it happens so often, and then you don't see her in the first half or you don't see her in the second quarter, and it just throws things off. And I've always said this too about Sanaya, and she knows I'm a huge fan of her. I feel like she's just got to be more aggressive. Like I called the NC State Clemson game, and I feel like Sanaya didn't even turn it on really till the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Like I need her to turn it on.
She got the early fouls too in the Clemson game.
Yes, and she got in foul trouble. Yeah. Like I need her to turn it on from the tip. And I'm sure they're all saying that. Westmore is probably talking about that too, but she's just we talk about Hannah and these other players that are unique, different athletes. I mean, that's Sanaya Rivers.
Yeah.
And you need her on the floor at all times. So I think it's good for NC State to kind of live under the radar. Westmore loves the underdog. He loves that vibe. No one's talking about us, whatever. I think that's great for NC State. And they can continue to bring their young bigs along. And I think they're going to probably make some noise when we get into postseason play.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned about Sinai. I think it's so tough for me with her too because you watch her did you watch the Davidson game that they played?
I think I watched a little, probably
Yeah.
not the whole thing.
Well, it's first off, Davidson's really good for people who haven't watched
Yes,
them.
they are.
But their whole thing is they switch everything. They play 6 foot to 6'2", every single position, switch everything. And Sanaya in that fourth quarter just decided I'm taking every switch possible and going to the rim. And you watch that game and it's to be fair, I think as well as this team can shoot it, their spacing isn't always the best. I think sometimes they can get a little bit bogged down in things. Having Tilda kind of figure some things out is helpful in that. But also you can see okay, you look at the Clemson game, you look at the Cal game where you can tell there's some visible frustration between players because you're not where you're supposed to be and this and that. And I think it's just about refining those things, especially execution wise. Because to me, the defense just isn't the same level it was last year, which has been the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
Getting the defense back to that level is key. And I think the issue is it's a good thing and a bad thing where it's well, we know we can be at that level, but also we know we can be at that level and we're not doing it.
Right.
And obviously, yeah, you have to figure that out with a different big, but I think with the guard play and what they can do, they should be able to shut down some of this stuff more. And it's just doing it consistently. But yeah, I think just figuring out how to kind of push those right buttons will be key. But you just look at what they've done in conference play so far. Sanaya was her box score outside of conference play was rough to start. And now she's shooting 48, 44, 70 in conference play is really just had some phenomenal games. Seems to be figuring out how to play off the ball a little bit more because they changed some things up with just how many guards they have in this group. But I mean, still very much a team that, again, second weekend, going deep, that's what they want to do and they're capable of doing. It's just kind of finding that. But just to do a little rapid fire because this is the hard part about the ACC.
There's 18
so
teams
much.
now.
I'll give you 30 seconds to give, or maybe slightly more than 30 seconds to just wrap real quick. First thing that comes to mind when I say Georgia Tech.
They got to get healthy. The other first thing that comes to mind is when I saw them play North Carolina, and I thought they were second best team in the league. But that was when they were healthy. They were playing great. Danny Carnegie was excellent in that game. I think Danny Carnegie calms them down, which is crazy because she's a freshman. But she calms them down. She's so calm and poised on offense. She gets them big buckets. She takes pressure off of Tony Morgan and Kara Dunn. So I think Georgia Tech still has the potential to be the second best team in the ACC. They've got to get Carnegie back. And I hope people understand that she has been hurt, got hurt in one of the losses, and then hurt for the next 2 losses. So their 3 losses have come without a full strength Danny Carnegie. So people just need to remember that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And Tony Morgan, I just got to say, Tony Morgan has been in the running for ACC Player of the Year. Obviously going to be behind Hannah, but she is so good. I cannot, her talent has always been there. But again, she just feels the game this year in a different way. Unreal player. It's funny too because this team low-key kind of obviously not the same, but similar to NC State last year of we go out on this really hot start, we look incredible, everything's great. People didn't expect us to do this. Also started off unranked, and then it's oh, here's this giant string of losses right as we get into ACC play. How do we figure this out? I think that they still have a lot that they can figure out. They're really talented. They're going to get there. Nell Fortner's really good. When I say Cal, we've mentioned Cal a little bit. This is the team for me that I had the most questions about, least expectations, I should say, especially coming into a new conference. What have you thought of Sharma Smith's team?
I love Cal. I love watching Cal play. Now, I know they've had, the Duke game, like I said. I think when you haven't played Duke before and you play them and they just bombard you, I think Cal looked discombobulated. I mean, that was for sure. But let's put that game aside. It's obviously an outlier. They, with Crumili and Twydale, 2 of the best shooters in the country on the same team. And then you have Marta Suarez coming along who's playing really well. They're so fun to watch. I did a tape on them last week where I just showed them literally passing up layups. to shoot threes, and it warms my heart. It's beautiful.
It
Now,
is beautiful.
there are times where maybe that's not the best call, but hey, I'm all for it. They play a unique style, they play it well, they have the perfect personnel to fit it. And it's interesting because I think that the Duke game was a combination of seeing Duke, not kind of knowing what it's like to play Duke, and traveling 3,000 miles. And that's what's weird about, and I'm sure you'll deal this when you talk Big Ten too, even some Big 12. Like, I'm not sure a single team, because Notre Dame doesn't go out to Cal and Stanford this year. I'm not sure a single ACC team is going to go out there and go 2-0. It's really hard to play Cal and Stanford back to back, two good teams, two very different styles, to travel out 3,000 miles, stay out there for, what is it, 4 days. NC State couldn't do it. Will North Carolina do it or whatever? And then for Cal and Stanford, are they going to come out here and go 2-0 on their road trips? It's a whole other situation. Then they got to go back home and then come back and do it again. I mean, Stanford barely beat Wake Forest. Like that's just crazy. So I think there's a lot of question marks with kind of the outside noise, but I still think Cal, probably more because of the travel and stuff, they probably won't get a top 4 NCAA tournament seed. But that's another team. If they're your 5 seed or they're your 6 seed, you're like, God, who did we make mad? Like, that is, you do not want to see Cal as your 5 or 6 seed. They're very dangerous.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the matchup with UNC whenever that
Yes, me
happens. Because,
too.
like you mentioned, in terms of stuff with Duke, I think their thing is like Cal's not a super athletic team. A lot of what they do is like rub actions, a ton of stuff that's off ball to sort of muck things up for you,
Yeah.
and they're really good at it. But when they play a team like Duke that's so long and good at just kind of containing stuff out of the middle, they're I mean, as much as they can struggle sometimes with execution, I think they're so good at just like shutting stuff like that down.
Yeah,
And
they
I think
are.
UNC is going to present kind of a similar thing. But you look at this Cal team, like you mentioned, I think the big thing is Marta Suarez for them. Like obviously everybody, but like she really lets them do a lot of kind of toying with what a front court can look like and what they
Mhm.
have to defend, which I think NC State really struggled with. So I'm excited to continue watching that and just how that develops for them. But I mean, this team is legit good. I think it was fair to like have questions earlier in the year, but with where they're at now, I'm like, no, this
Yeah,
team is just good. They're gonna go.
they're good.
They're a tournament team for sure.
Mhm.
Well, Kelly, I know I took up more of your time than I was even thinking, but I mean, if we were gonna get to every team, it would literally take like 2 3 hours.
It
So
would.
I
It would.
appreciate your time. Really, is there anything you want to shout out before we get out of here?
Well, first of all, welcome to our show, because that's what we deal with every night on ACC
It's
Network on
so
Thursday
hard.
nights.
Anytime, like seriously, anytime you talk about an entire conference, people are like, "Well, why did you talk about?" I'm like, dude, if I could, I swear, like,
Yeah.
please.
No, it's way too hard. It's way too hard. I think, just in terms of the teams, because of course we couldn't hit on all of them. I really liked, maybe because I just called them, I liked what I've seen from Virginia Tech. I think
Carly
that's a
Wenzel's been
team.
really good this year.
Yeah, Wenzel, Lonnie White was big in that game against Louisville. I would just, if Megan Duffy can get this team to the tournament in year 1, absolute hats off to her. She's doing a great job there. I'd be very impressed with that. And of course, they retired Kitley's jersey, which was really cool to see and just like be a part of. I think a player like Kamora Johnson probably doesn't get enough love just because Virginia hasn't been winning as many games, but Kamora Johnson is special. And I'm so curious to see what Virginia does because Alexis Ohanian has invested all this money in their program. So can they go get some exciting transfers in the offseason? And I mean, their net is not good, but the way they're knocking off teams, who knows? If they could win like 14 ACC games or
Yeah,
something crazy, something wild could happen. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just been a really fun year in the league so far. I'm curious to see if Notre Dame can go undefeated. I'm curious to see who can really emerge to get those top 4 seeds. And then Greensboro, it's always a blast. So can't
it's
wait.
gonna be insanity in Greensboro. I have no doubt.
Yeah,
Well,
it is.
Kelly, I appreciate your time. To everyone watching, of course, keep up with all things ACC women's basketball. You will undoubtedly see Kelly
Mhm.
as you're doing that, and enjoy the rest of your day.